Hey, Alec Miller here, founder of Rosen Rogues, and today I'm going to teach you guys how to melt anything in LiquiGen. Now, don't skip ahead because I have some important announcements to make right after this. Okay, so the channel's been growing, and I want to say thank you so much. I really appreciate every single subscriber, every single viewer, and especially everyone that's been downloading the project files. That being said, I want to do an experiment with this video. We've gotten monetized, and now there's ads on everything. And I sort of feel awful about it. I don't like the fact that you come to my channel to learn something new and then you get hit right away with some political message or scam or crypto bro trying to sell you something. And it's like, you're here to learn, you're here to get a solution to a problem or learn a new technique or improve yourself, and instead you're getting marketed to by some rando. And what I would like to do is actually be able to turn off ads on all of our educational content. But in order to do that, I have to find some way of compensating for that loss of income. Now, it's not a lot. Like, as a whole, throughout the 3 years or 5 years I've been running this YouTube channel, we've made a total of $100. So it's not a lot of money for the probably hundreds, maybe thousands of hours I've put into this. But I think we're at the size now where I've done the math, and if people that are downloading the project files were to be able to give me $1 to $2, that would mean I could turn off ads on all these tutorials. And so what I'm going to experiment with this video is we'll have no ads on it. You guys will get to watch without any of that bothering you. But I am going to be charging $1, maybe $2. I haven't decided yet, for the project files. You know what? We'll make it $1.50. I'll charge $1.50 for the project files. That way I'm not charging you for views. I'm not asking you for yet another subscription in your life. Oh, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my Patreon. Like, you have too many of those as it is. But I am giving you something in exchange for a little bit of money, which allows me to keep this whole thing going. So if that's a fair exchange, if that's something that sounds reasonable to you, and if you hate ads as much as I do, then go and buy the project file. First off, that's the biggest way you can let me know this is working. And secondly, leave me a comment in the description down below. Do you think that's fair? I'm not trying to be greedy here. I'm not trying to, I'm a small channel. I'm not trying to be like, oh, let me make as much money as possible. The last thing I want to say is all the money, by the way, that this channel produces isn't going to be going into like my pocket. What it's going to be doing is funding our short film. So that's been something that we've been talking about doing for a very long time. It's still in the works. It's still happening, but it only happens whenever I have the money to put into it. So if I, do a big client project and I get a little bit of extra change, that goes to the short film. And that's made the progress very slow. So hopefully by taking the profits from this YouTube channel, putting it into the short film, hopefully that adds to that. And what's cool about that is once that short film is done, that becomes a whole new set of tutorials for you guys. If any of that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments below how you feel, and especially go download those project files and throw me $1 or so, and then we can keep ads off these videos. Okay, so now without any further delays or excuses or talk about gross finances, let's have some fun melting things. Okay, so here's what it looks like whenever you start up LiquiGen. And we want to change a few things right away to get this melt effect going. I'm going to be covering 2 different ways of melting today, and they're both useful for various types of projects. I will give you a disclaimer, which is we're not going to be able to melt moving objects yet. I'll be working on that in the future, but for now, it needs to be a static object. So something that's by default not moving around, and you'll see why in a second. So first things first is you don't want this continually spawning new liquid. We just want it to spawn a solid object. So let's turn up the length of the lifetime of the particles, so that way they're not disappearing on us. And let's go from emission mode, continuous, to fill. And then we have just once on here, which means it's just going to fill the object once, and that's it. The next thing we want to do is get rid of this shape. We don't need it, and the collider. Okay, so it's falling to the ground instantly, and we don't want that. How you change that is by getting rid of your forces, right? So if I disconnect this force, as you can see, it's just sitting there. Now, we don't want to disconnect it though. We actually want control over the force. And how we're going to do that is drag out a mask shape. And we're just going to do a primitive for now. Sphere's fine. We're just going to increase the size. And what this allows us to do is say only what's inside this mask is going to get affected. So now, if I were to move this up and touch our sphere here, you can see we've started it going. And so this allows us to have fine control over what is happening in our scene, in our liquid, and when it starts and stops. So that's cool, but it's not really looking very melty. We're just activating it. Also, this effect, you could use it, let's say I shrink this down. You could use this for like, let's say you had an aquarium and you needed a wall to break or a dam or something like that. This would be a good way of doing that, right? You just have this hit where it needs to and sort of cause this leak, as it were. So this is a good solution for leaking stuff. And if we keep it here long enough, it will drain the shape. So that's a really cool way of doing that, that sort of effect. So let's change our emitter shape here. We're going to make it a cylinder. We're going to make it a little wider and a lot taller. Let's make it like 8. There we go. Let's bring it down to the floor. So that way we don't have to wait for it to fall. Okay, doke. The other thing I'm going to do is add a drain, because right now this water is just going to keep leaking out forever and ever and ever. And I don't really want to have to deal with that. So I'm going to add a drain. We're going to pull out from simulation drain and then in our drain shapes and then create a shape. Now what we're going to do is make this a cylinder, make this way big, maybe like 20 by like 20, and draw it up. So the problem with that right now is it just kills everything. So what we need to do is go to our drain and hit invert shape. And now, as you can see, it's a hollow shape, but anything outside of it will go away. So as this goes and hits the edge, it's just going to kill anything that leaves it. And that keeps us from having to calculate these particles forever and ever. I generally recommend drains on all sims just to keep it from, having like a memory, continuously draining your system's memory. Let me lower that a little bit. Okay. So let's also change the liquid appearance while we're here. And we'll make it a little more like a candlestick, let's say. So let's turn up some of the reflection, some of the roughness, make this like a little bit of a darker color. Okay, there we go. It's kind of candlestick like. So have it play. We're still just getting that instant drain. So the next thing to do is make this actually feel like a melting object, right? Like a melting liquid and not just like a draining liquid. And how you do that is in our simulation tab. So we go to simulation. The few things we want to change. One is I'm going to change the voxel size just to make this look a little bit better for me. So I'm going to change it to 0.09. And what that's going to do is give us a little bit more accuracy in our model. I'm not too worried about this because we're going to smooth this in post, and we can actually smooth it down here too if this is bothering us too much. But you can always smooth in whatever program you're going to be finishing your renders in. So it's getting a little better here. One of the other things we want to do is look at mostly this section here. So our flip, our stickiness, and our density. So if I up the size of this a little bit, and we get a bunch of water hitting the ground, you can see it all spreads out and goes everywhere instantly. And that's because we have a really high flip ratio. So flip is more or less for ocean and like sparse liquid sims, versus pick is going to be making this stick together a little bit more. And so you can instantly see, if I change that, let me rotate the sun here real quick. It's sticking together a lot better now, versus when we have a high flip, you can see it spreads out and causes these gaps and holes. So that's a really good setting to look at. The next thing we're going to do is turn up our stickiness. And what that's going to do is just make it stick. And so this makes it a little more wax-like or chocolate-like or whatever we really want to do. If you put like a mid stickiness or a low stickiness, it can be a little more honey-like where it kind of builds up. So this is sort of our viscosity, as it were. I believe we don't have a direct viscosity setting, but more or less stickiness is that. It will also cause it to stick to collider objects and things like that, but stickiness is a pretty good one. For this, I'm going to have it be 100 because we're going to want this to move pretty slow. The next thing we're going to do is, if you notice, it still drains pretty quick. And there's a few reasons for that, but one of them is because our gravity is pulling at the rate of gravity, and this is just being pulled straight down. But if you want to slow that down a little bit, you can grab a force and then do a drag. And what a force drag does is just drag the liquid. So it's a little slower. So there you go. You can see it kind of hits a slow-mo as it goes down. And already what we have is a pretty cool effect. So if I shrink this down and I were to move this to the middle of our sort of candle-like object here, and bring it down, you can see we're just kind of slowly melting this like you would a candle. And if I pull it on the outside here, pull it to the corner, I can slowly melt the side and create sort of some candle wax. Now, this is great and all. However, it's only going 100% within the circle and 0% outside the circle, right? So you can see it's a very specific point that's getting affected. If I go to the middle here, you can kind of see that. And what we want to do is make it have some fall off and not be 100% or 0. And you can do that with the mask fall off settings. And so if I turn up the fall off to like 1, let's say, I hit restart, nothing happens. And that's because we need the mask fall off. And so by turning this up, you can see, there we go. Now it's getting greater in the center and weaker on the edge. And we can change the distance until this makes more sense. Let's turn to 0.1. And there you go. That might be decent. You can also turn this fall off to like 0.5, and we can start to art direct this a lot more. And there we have it. Now we got something that sort of has the ball itself is causing the melt, but there's an area outside the ball that has a drop off on it. So that way it still affects things a little bit around it as well. So if it's still melting too fast, we can turn the drag up to like 2. And that might help it not continue to fall the whole time. There we go. Now it sort of stops as it gets farther away from our sphere. And that allows us to be very, very like specific with how we want this to go, right? If we're trying to make, let's say, 100 candles for a scene and you need to really quickly model them, you can almost use this as like a modeling tool. Right, and there we have it. We've just kind of created a custom candle very, very quickly. I guess I can move this up to the center as well here. And maybe do a little bit of melting in this middle. And there you have it. There's our custom candle. I'm sorry, guys. This is just so much fun that it's easy to get distracted. But let's just set up something real quick so we can see how this might work if you wanted to do like a real-time candle melt for like a time lapse. You have somebody studying in a... Let's say you have someone studying in a library and you want to show time passing, so you have this candle melting as they study. So what we're going to do is animate sort of the wick here going down through the candle, and we'll make this pretty small. And we're just going to hit a keyframe on the position and then change any of these numbers to make it stay. And then once we have that, we're going to go forward a good few frames. You can hold down Control and scroll to zoom out on your timeline to like 800, and then let's move it down just through the candle. Maybe not that far, maybe like halfway. Okay, I'm going to select all of our keyframes, right click, and I'm going to go to interpolation mode and then linear. And that just means that it's going to stay the same amount as it goes. So the whole time it's going through, it doesn't have any easing on it. It's not going to be very fast in the middle and slow at the ends. It's going to be the same rate of movement throughout. There you go. It's a very consistent rate. Versus if I made this like a Bezier, let's see if I can show this. It'd be slow and then faster and then slow again as it gets to the end. Maybe if I move these really close, I'll be more visible. Yeah, there we go. So that's Bezier, right? Versus if I make it linear, it's going to be consistent. There we go. And then we want another one on the side, melting, kind of art directing this on the edge. So we're going to grab these two guys, copy, paste, and then connect them again to the forces. And this time, we're going to delete our second set of keyframes. We're going to move this up to here, make it a little bit larger. Move it where it needs to be here. Okay, I'm going to change the names of these so that they're easier. This is going to be edge. And our main one's going to be wick. There we go. So now it's easier to see down here what I'm changing, updating the keyframes of. So I spent a little time setting up some keyframes for these shapes. I'll save you the headache. You guys know how to add keyframes. You just hit the keyframe button. And then from there, you can change a setting and it will create a keyframe, and then you can hit play and then change it again and it will adjust. But I don't need to waste your time making you watch all that. But so now this moves over and then it moves down And you could see how you could do a time lapse of, say, a candle melting. And it would feel pretty good. Like, this looks legit, right? That looks like how a candle kind of melts. And you can obviously think of all sorts of ways you could do this. And you don't have to use the spheres. You could bring in your own custom shapes. So if you wanted it to melt on multiple sides at once, you could bring in 3 or 4 different objects that look and feel different, that move in different ways, and have them each cause the exact look you want, like kind of like putting a mold or a press over the thing. The other thing you can do is, if you want it to stop at a certain point that you really like, you're like, oh, that's really nice. Okay, and then it goes down there. That's cool. And it hits the ground. All right, but I want it to stop like there. What you can do is you can turn on freeze simulation. And what that does is it will freeze it at that keyframe. Now you're going to have an earlier keyframe where it's off. And so now if I hit play, it's going to go through, it's going to move down, it's going to cause everything we want it to cause. And then as it hits this keyframe here, it's going to go from not frozen to frozen. And now it's going to stay the same, exactly the way we want it. So that's a good way to get that to happen. So that's one way to do it, right? Is this kind of cool, only in this vicinity, only in this area. But what if we want the whole thing to melt and to stay melted? Well, that's where I'm going to bring you into another project file. So let's save this one and let's open up one I've been working on. Okay, so here's the second example of this effect. So I have more or less the same setup, but as you can see, the whole thing ends up melting at different times, and it stays melted down here at the end. And if you notice, we don't have that large drag effect. So this would be useful if you're trying to melt like a metal ingot, right, in like a forge or something like that. And you just need the whole thing to slowly sort of melt. So what I've done is, as you can see, I still have my stickiness high, I still have my flip low. I'm turning up compensate decompression as we melt this thing, because as you saw, if I have it turned on right away, the whole thing starts imploding. But towards the end here, I definitely don't want it to have all this movement necessarily. But the difference between this is I have a turbulence and a force constant, and they're both being affected by this custom model that I just animated. So that way the melting feels somewhat random. Now the model is bigger than our bunny. So I'm going to show this, how this plays out by turning off our imported model and turning on these two shapes. So same thing as before, we have our force constant. This is our mask. And then we have a turbulence, and this is our mask. And the why these look different is I want the turbulence going off to make that bunny. We'll turn off that one for now. And you can see this play out. So as it goes through, it breaks up the bunny. So he's not sitting in one position, right? It's like, it's not a super smooth line. It roughens it up. So it's almost like the heat distortion of the melt starting, and then we pull in the gravity above that. But it only happens while it's in this container. Afterwards, you notice it kind of freezes again. It slows back down. And that's exactly how we want that to function. The other one I have here is slightly offset, right? So it's slightly above the turbulence, and that way, as that hits it, it actually starts pulling it down. It turns on the gravity. So this is bigger than our bunny, and there's a reason for that. The reason why this cone is so big is, if I were to make it smaller, you'll notice that only what's inside the cylinder is being affected by gravity, and everything else is sort of gets this floaty effect. But we want the gravity to hit and then continue to apply, which means that the cylinder has to be large enough that it encompasses everything, and now it all gets affected by the gravity effect. So that's why we have that so big and this one small, as we only want this one affecting on the edge, and we want this one affecting the whole time. And if you notice, we have this very like flat and even, right? It's like there's clearly a plane that's just pushing down on this bunny, which could be cool if you're trying to do like a crushing effect or something. But we want this to be broken up. And so that's where my custom model comes in with these weird undulating shapes, is now the bunny gets melted in an uneven way. And it's a sort of really nice effect. The only other change is I've also made the bunny hollow. And so if we go to our emitter, we have fill surface, and that's because I always had the cheapo bunnies for Easter that were hollow on the inside so that they didn't take as much chocolate. If you had a full chocolate bunny, like solid chocolate, you were a rich kid. I hate to break it to you, your parents were well off. So, but we were middle class, so we got the hollow bunnies. So that's 2 melting effects. They're pretty quick setups, but they're really versatile and very fun. Like I said, there's some limitations to this. You can't have this be animated at the moment because once it spawns, we've frozen all these particles, right? So these are all frozen. So now if I grab our bunny shape, let's say, and I were to move it, it doesn't have any effect because all these were frozen in shape and in position. The other limitation of this is if I melt from the bottom up, right? So I'm down below and I start melting upwards, this isn't going to start bending and falling, right? It's just sort of turning into a liquid, which has its own cool effect, as you can see, but this all stays in place, right? So it's like I'm cutting it away, but it's not like physics is going to start applying to this as I weaken what's underneath. So here's a good example. I'm going to cut the head off completely, and you'll notice where in the real world, once there's nothing to hold you up, you would fall. And this, the top of the head is being held up still. So that's the other limitation to this for the moment. But this is super promising because we're still in alpha. We're still in alpha, guys. And we can already do this awesome stuff. So, you know, have fun killing bunnies. Have fun melting all your bunnies. And have fun making wax candles. I'd love to see what you guys make with this setup, because it's, like I said, it's pretty versatile. You could, you know, melt away some snow. You could have a Frosty the Snowman type effect where Frosty starts melting as the sun comes up. You can melt chocolate Easter bunnies. You could melt candles, as I've shown, but you can melt whatever you want, right? If you want to have a stick of butter that gets melted over something, if you want to have, you know, chocolate bar that melts, the sky's the limit with this effect, and hopefully this setup is useful for you guys to be able to make some really cool and potentially nasty effects. So that's that. That's how you melt pretty much anything in LiquiGen. It's a super fast, super responsive setup. You can almost use it for sculpting, as I showed with the candle. You could, you know, draw your name in the sand or something. You can do all sorts of stuff with this effect, and I think it's a really fun way. This is one of my favorite things to do, is take a program that's made kind of for one thing and then break it to make it do something else that maybe it wasn't necessarily intended to do, but actually does to really great results. Let me know what you think of adding a price tag to the project files and removing ads. I like not having ads. Did you like not having any ads for this video? And without further ads or ado, I'll see you in the next one.